May stumble over myself a few times here, but we're going to get through it, I think. This episode is brought to you by the Seamen's Church Institute's Center for Maritime Education. For inland, offshore, and deep sea mariners, state-of-the-art simulators and e-learning modules for critical and comprehensive mariner training, assessments, feasibility studies, and research. Today's guest is Captain Stephen Polk. He currently supervises the Seamen's Church Center for Maritime Education. Before joining, he was a senior port captain for Kirby Inland Marine and managed several types of inland towing vessels in the Canal Division. Captain Polk is a certified crew endurance management system expert and holds a United States Coast Guard third mate unlimited tonnage Oceans license. He also recently earned his Master of Towing Vessel and 300-ton Master Oceans endorsement on his license. A veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Captain Polk served in the U.S. Navy with 2 patrol boat units. As Lieutenant Commander, he has worked in various leadership and supervisory roles, such as Tactical Communications Officer, Training Department Head, and Operations Department Head for both of the patrol boat units he was assigned to. Captain Polk has logged over 10,000 hours of tactical and underway command experience while protecting ports and performing escorts of MSC and Navy warships in and out of various harbors worldwide. Captain Polk started in the maritime industry as an able seaman for polar tankers and as a third mate and working in the TAPS trade, moving crude oil from Valdez, Alaska to various ports along the west coast of the United States. He graduated from Texas A&M University at Galveston in 1997 with a Bachelor of Science in Marine Transportation. Captain Polk, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you for your time here this morning. Appreciate the discussion here and of course, Seamen's Church support for my project here. How did you first find out about my little podcast show?
Well, I understand that you had interviewed Mark Nesselhut previously, and again, like we talked about earlier, and several people that have come through our training shop in Paducah and Houston. I recognize the name. Rudy Ward is one, and so I always want to hear what Rudy has to say, and so it's good that you're capturing these stories before these people retire or move on. And so I commend you for capturing this stuff because it tells the story of how did we get here.
Yeah, no, it's been a fascinating journey for sure. And the project kind of grew its own legs. I'm not, not a huge following, but people seem to appreciate what I'm doing. My little small audience seems pretty faithful. Well, tell me about meeting Rudy Ward for the first time and your experiences with him. He seemed to sort of light up when you noticed him on my show.
Yeah, he came through maybe 10 years ago when I was just running the Houston Center, and he was working for Pine Bluff Sand and Gravel, and of course he's just a larger than life individual full of all kinds of interesting stories, and he reminds me of so many other guys I worked with early on in the late 90s after school. And I could just listen to them talk about their knowledge of the waterways and sea stories all night long, and just laugh. He's just a great guy, and that's one of the challenges I think I have and some of the instructors have at SCI is that how can you get the younger audience in the room, whether it's steersmen or new pilots, to learn from this older generation of professionals before they move on. And there's so much we can learn from them about the job and how it was and how that applies to today. And so it was good having them in the class. Sometimes it's hard to teach someone like that when they have 50 years of experience and you're 40 years old. So it could be a bit intimidating, but you know, they understand what the goal is and what we're trying to do, and he certainly made the class enjoyable.
Well, how much? I've never attended a simulator class or course, or I've seen it, walked by it a few times in Houston, and I attended the facility in Paducah once, so far at least. What sort of feedback or what's the back and forth between instructor and student? These experienced pilots that come in and say, "Oh, this will never work," or "This doesn't make sense." Or what is that? How do y'all develop a better product?
Well, there's two things I would say that we're trying to do when people come in. Uh, you know, consider that we don't always get to control who the company sends or how the class is composed, whether it's all captains or all steersmen or a mixture of experiences. Um, and one of the things the instructors are trying to do is make sure everyone, as much as we can, has the same knowledge base. Um, and then provide them with the chance to experiment or experience new things or practice something that may be high hazard or risky. And then, again, without being judgmental, um, the best type of class is one where you allow the students the opportunity to learn from each other. And if they realize there's a better way, they realize it from their peers. Um, One of the challenges you have as an instructor or a facilitator, if you're there on behalf of Ingram as a port captain or Kirby, you have facilitators, is when you try to tell a student something, it's almost like kids. When mom and dad says something, kids aren't going to listen. But if the brother or sister says it, they're more likely to, or the coach, they're more likely to hear what was said and maybe adopt and try what's being asked of them. So messaging is important. You don't want to come off as trying to be smarter than someone else, or it's a turnoff. But certainly it's like a laboratory where if you can make it fun, make it enjoyable, give them the opportunity to try something new and have the group learn from each other. That's the best outcome. They're gonna remember that experience, and then hopefully the goal is they carry it with them when they go back to the boat and actually use the things that we're teaching.
How do you measure success of these programs?
So right now, um, everyone kind of gets a certificate if they're here for the class, but long term, we're looking at developing assessments for different things. And that can be tricky because, not every company approaches or has the same procedures or checklists for making a lock or making a bridge or doing this certain maneuver a certain way. But moving forward, I think you're going to be looking at data. How much throttle did this individual use, or how much rudder did this person use, or what was his speed going into this bend or approaching this bridge? Um, and you can measure all that stuff now with the simulator. And I think you'll see more data and more, hopefully, agreement on what's safe or what's low risk versus what's high risk or near miss versus what's a failure. And we're working on some of those protocols as we do feasibility studies, but sometimes it's hard when you're doing a class because, as I said earlier, you have a mix of individuals with varying experience levels, or you have a mix of, say, canal guys and river guys, and they're going to sometimes approach things differently. And just like anything, you could watch me make a bridge and say, man, he almost hit it, but that may be the way you make the bridge. And so it's hard if you're not posted or you don't have that experience, um, to have a specific way of doing anything. So it's a work in progress. Um, but it's certainly something we're working on in terms of having metrics for success.
What are the biggest challenges you face with students these days?
Well, today, lots of people like to rely on the electronic chart, and it is a it is attractive in the sense that it shows a lot. It tends to work very well, and it's easy to get complacent looking at it. Um, I'm more of a fan of, you know, in the late 90s, you didn't have AIS, you didn't have electronic charts. You had to use your eyeballs, look out the window, use the radar. And some of those, you know, older ways of doing things, I think are still the best, and maybe it's a Reagan thing. You trust but verify. You can look at the electronic chart and provided it's set up properly and you're getting the most out of it. But then how do you verify that it's what it's showing you is correct? And that's really where the radar comes in, plays a role, and your eyeballs and utilizing all of your resources, communicating effectively. It's easy to get tunnel vision nowadays, particularly, when you have a whole generation of people that grew up with this technology. So they're very trusting of it. And you just have to make sure they understand the limitations of it.
And what are the biggest positives or I guess successes of the program for the students themselves?
Well, one of the successes that we have now is that, most companies, I think they see the benefit of getting people started early, like right out of high school, right out of a community college program or one of the maritime schools, getting them trained. You can train them, I think, more efficiently by incorporating simulation, doing some of the more high risk tour items in the simulator or seasonal items in the simulator. So if it's March and you're looking for a low water tour sign off, you could do that in the simulator. And if it's August or September and you need high water, well, you're going to be waiting a while. So you can do some of these things in the simulator and, checking these things off is not the right way to describe it, but you might get a chance as a steersman to do these maneuvers once or twice a hitch, whereas we can have you run through it 4 or 5 times in a day, and the instructors can quickly see if you've, you know, learned the basics and understand what's happening and you know what to do about it. You can do that very quickly and very effectively in the simulator. Plus, you can allow them to fail, which is something you can't do on the boat. So those are what I would call successes. And we've seen that with the simulator getting better and better every year. The models get better, the databases get better, the technology's improved. And so we can do things now with the simulator that were, I would say, hard to do in the late 90s. So that's a good thing.
What sort of things today that weren't available in the 90s are you able to do?
Well, in the in the late 90s, you had projection bridges with it's almost like an IMAX screen with this, surround 270 degrees surround visual view. And the screen was 20 feet away. So one of the challenges we had back then was close quarters maneuvering, locking, docking. If it was a offshore event, doing ship to ship lightering, if you're going alongside. Um, with the screen being 20 feet away, how can you ever get close to anything? And sometimes some of these bridges, you're 108 feet wide and the lock is 110 feet wide. So the image would be cut off by the floor. And um, that was just one of the many challenges that you had with the design of the wheelhouse, so to speak. And even in the early 2000s, when you had flat screen technology, the problem was the flat screen plasmas were ten or $15,000 a piece. So a nonprofit like SCI couldn't afford to update the pilot houses with flat screens. Now, they're $500. So you can do almost a wraparound visual view and face up to barges and get inside the lock chambers and go alongside the dock. If you're a light boat, you can do own ship to own ship assist. And there's just things that you wouldn't even try before because you couldn't see it. And the boat design, the databases are much, much higher fidelity now than they have ever been. And I just think that's some of that is the technology's improved with the PCs. Our earlier computers ran Windows NT, and of course now they're on Windows 10. The video cards back then had their own computer act as a video card. Now there's multiple video cards in there with RAM and super advanced processors, and just the incorporation of updated bathymetry of the river, updated high fidelity currents. It's the realism is so far beyond what we were capable of even computing 10, 15 years ago. So I think you're going to continue to see those advances, which that really helps when I can take an individual from, say, Ingram or a harbor tug company, and I can place them on their boat. And then, like, let's say it's a steersman, I can actually put them where the boat works in that harbor. And you talk about setting them up for success. We can do the tour on their boat in that harbor with the high fidelity currents. And it's quite remarkable what you can do for that individual's confidence, their ability to be promoted. They're not waiting like they used to do back in the day, for the right conditions or the right time. And you can really see what this guy's, one, how he's proficient, and two, if he has a gap somewhere in his knowledge or his application, you can practice the repetition that we have now. You can almost send them back to the boat they're assigned to, a different person at the end of the week, along with the report to the training captain. Here's what the guy needs before you break him out as a pilot. And being able to do that now, you just didn't have that 10 years ago.
So certainly more immersive and valuable today, maybe than it was historically. We'll
I think
touch
so.
base. We'll touch base more on the program, I imagine, as we go here. But did you tell me earlier you got into college before your naval service?
I did. I went to A&M, went to Spring High School north of Houston, graduated in 93, went straight to Texas A&M at Galveston, graduated in December of 97. Um, and, similar to the Kings Point folks, I did the Naval Scholarship while I was there. So that explains the naval service. Um, and then instead of going to flight school, which I had an opportunity to do, I went ahead and worked on my license, and I did a couple hitches with Diamond Offshore, um, on a old Victory class rig, semi-submersible in the Gulf as a ballast control operator trainee, and quickly discovered it wasn't for me. Um, I didn't like, sitting somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. The job was fine, but every time a ship would go by the rig, I'd look at the binoculars and just wonder where they're going, and um, so sitting in one place and doing stability and trim calculations and things of that nature just wasn't my thing. So I left and went to work for Kirby in 1998 in the office. And my first job with them was uh, Jim Guidry said, I want you to put a computer on every towboat we have in our fleet. And they were moving away from faxing orders and, timesheets for tendering and picking up barges and dropping off barges and things of that nature um, by fax to utilizing a computer-based traffic system where they had to enter in, pickups and drops and departures and things of that nature via the watercom system. And I had 6 months, or I think I had 6 months to put a computer on every boat, or maybe it was a year, and I did it in half the time. So they ended up giving me a handful of boats to manage, and that's when I fell in love. Actually, was I realized these guys, some of them couldn't read and write, um, but they were just the most down to earth, wonderful people, you know, just amazing individuals that I've ever seen in my life. And they could run a boat better than anybody I'd ever seen. And now, hard, sometimes really hard, rough around the edges is the way I would describe them, but they just had a heart of gold and really cared about the company and the crews. And, once they adopt you, um, it's just amazing. It gets into your blood and you just fall in love with it. And I left Kirby in 2000. Again, I was young and chasing the dollar, went to work for Motiva um, up in the Northeast, shoreside. Um, and it wasn't for me. I missed the maritime business. And that's when I went to work for Polar Tankers. Um, I was able to work as an AB and a third mate for them. Um, some of it was small tankers, Panamax. Some of it was larger tankers, Suezmaxes, VLCCs. I don't know if VLCC is right, but I was on what they called the 188s, and that was the Polar California, um, where we would load in Valdez and then discharge Anacortes, um, Chevron, Long Wharf in San Francisco, Martinez, and then back. Um, did that for a year or so. And then just after bad experiences, I suppose, or bad luck, problems with my marriage at the time, went back to Kirby and they accepted me back with open arms. So went back to work with them. They were having some issues in Texas City and helped them get that back on track with business, and then became a port captain with them. Um, Shortly after that, we had 9/11, and I was I had changed my um, designator with the Navy from the supply side. It was at the Merchant Marine Reserve Program, like most people do coming out of a maritime school. I had changed it to coastal warfare after 9/11, and I was assigned to a unit in Corpus Christi, MU 108, which is Mobile Inshore Undersea Warfare Unit. It's a surveillance unit, surveillance, intelligence, things of that nature for port security. And they activated us in 2003. They turned us into a boat unit in San Diego, and we trained for 3 months in Coronado, and then did my assignment overseas, came back, went back to Kirby. And I guess in '07, my wife, I remarried, we had a baby, um, and I needed something that would allow me to have more regular hours, with the baby at home. I couldn't work nights. I couldn't hit the road and visit my boats that were, in New Orleans or Corpus. And that's what brought me to Seamen's Church in 2007. Started as an instructor, um, worked my way up to director a year later, and then in 2011, um, my old boss Eric Larson left, and I inherited Paducah and Houston, and so it's been quite the journey, um, and it's it's been amazing to see everything evolve up to this point. Uh, I'm probably rambling. I'll stop now, but
That's no problem. I can always edit as needed, but some questions came up as you were talking, and we'll work through this kind of step by step. But normally the format, at least historically, the first 100 episodes or so, it was a pretty standardized list of questions. You grew up in the Houston area, born
mhm,
and raised.
mhm.
Uh, when were you born?
I was born in March, March 8th, 1975.
Okay. And what did your parents do for a living? Walk me through your childhood up, I guess, until to and through high school before you went to
Sure.
A&M.
Um, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My parents met in the Air Force, and my dad worked for International Harvester on the trucking side in sales. Um, they moved from Dallas um, to I think it was New Orleans and then Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he would sell the big rigs, big trucks for International Harvester, and then he took a job with I believe it was Wilson in Houston in 1981. But that's when the recession hit and oil and gas just cratered. And he went to work. He worked as a carpenter for a period of time. Um, Started in HVAC, which is a great career when you live in Houston because you have to have air conditioning. And did that for 10 years or so. Um, when that, I think that business was sold, he drove school buses for a period of time. And then when I was in high school, he took a job with Capt in San Jose, California, where he worked in the plants, milk plants, water plants, servicing the equipment, capping equipment, um, and bottling equipment. So making sure the blow molders were cranking out the plastic bottles and the cap fixtures were not the process wasn't slowing down because you can really those are some amazing plants to observe, um, making sure that there's minimal downtime and that the caps weren't failing, so you don't want to have spilled milk or spilled product. And did very well with that and ended up taking a job in California when I went to college. And my mom never really worked. She would volunteer and take care of me and my brothers. I have an older brother who was in the Air Force for 24 years, and then he's a firefighter in DC. And then the middle brother was at A&M with me. He stuck with um, the offshore, you know, exploration and production with Diamond, and was licensed as a captain, worked on drill ships, and is at BP right now. But um, yeah, mom was a stay-at-home mom, and that was probably the best thing ever because we would have been in all kinds of trouble had we been the traditional latchkey kids of the 80s.
Well, how was schooling for you and what drew you to a maritime college?
Well, truth be told, I wanted to go to College Station. it's all I knew. Um, I was going to do business like everyone else. And my brother also applied to College Station, but I guess didn't get in, didn't make the cut. He was a much better student than me. And when when he when he didn't make the cut, it was like a week later, A&M Galveston said, "Well, we understand, you know, the roles are filled there, but why don't you come take a look at us in Galveston?" And we all went down there as a family. Um, Dan was accepted and did the summer cruise and absolutely fell in love. And my dad um, said, "Look, you're going to go down there with your brother." I think he knew me better than I knew myself, and he knew one at a smaller student to teacher ratio, and he knew that my brother would look out for me, and there was a less chance of me dropping out, failing out, or getting into trouble. And I went down there, followed my brother, and fell in love with it, just like he did. And the friends that you make when you're on the vessel together for the summer, and the bonds that form over the course of that experience, are forever. And similar what you hear when you talk to people who serve in the military together or on a towboat together. You have your boat family and you have your home family, and um, it's just it's an amazing career, and I've loved every minute of it. So um, I never thought about leaving A&M Galveston once I was accepted, and it was just a great experience from 93 to 97 with the the old Clipper, um, and then the transition to the new Clipper, um, and the instructors at the time, they were just fantastic.
Well, fill me in on that curriculum and of course your semesters or summers at sea.
So I studied marine transportation with the license option, and your first year it's mostly seamanship, terrestrial navigation, the basics, English and math and things of that nature. Um, your second year, and that's really your first year, they're preparing you for that first summer at sea so that you understand basic helm commands if you're steering the ship, or you understand knots and seamanship, things of that nature. The basics of standing a watch and being useful if you're on deck, um, so you don't hurt yourself or someone else. And then the second year, you get into celestial navigation, um, uh, maybe tanker operations. Um, this is just the next set of classes, radar, things of that nature. By year three, you're doing your upper level classes like naval architecture, um, electronic navigation, and then your last year, it's more license prep training. But I didn't really know what I was going to do when I was in school. Again, like I said, there were times where I wanted to join the Navy and go to flight school, but it's certainly it lays a great foundation for anyone wanting to start anywhere in the maritime business, whether that's towboats, tugboats, supply boats, oil and gas, military. It really teaches you about life, and things like firefighting, which you may not think about as a kid when you're at home, um, and how to be safe. Knots. I mean, I some of these things that they teach you, you use every day as an adult, and you just don't think about it. But it really makes you a better person, a better crewmate, and it teaches you about life, and everyone should have that type of experience. I think if they did, we wouldn't have some of the problems we see today.
But was it the Navy Reserve that you joined?
I did, Navy
And
Reserve.
was that immediately after college?
I was commissioned when I graduated. And, like I said, the first 4 years I was doing the Merchant Marine Reserve program. And back then you would graduate without your STCW certificate, the training. So the first couple 2 weeks a year, I went to A&M and did my bridge resource management, the basic safety class. I think the second year, I did training at Kings Point at GMATs. I did the tankerman class. Um, I did ARPA. All those basic classes that you had to have. And then by year three, um, that's when I was changing communities in the Navy, and I was assigned to um, the Navy Yard, and I had to build a weapons database for the ships on active duty being mobilized after 9/11. And then shortly after that, I was what they call cell res, and that's where you're not in active reserve, you're active reserve training 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year for a specific mission. And that's when I was assigned to the MU-108 in Corpus Christi.
Did you find that the A&M curriculum or the A&M program, how well did it prepare you for your first roles in the Navy Reserve, and I guess going forward in your career? How did that curriculum benefit you? And do you see today, I'm sure the program is a little bit different in 30 years, but
Mhm.
do you see today um, any areas of potential improvement to help the future mariner be better prepared for a career?
It did prepare me for, what to expect. Um, standing a watch or serving in the Navy. Um, the and I guess the way it prepared you, I would describe it as in the merchant marines, whether it's on towboats or ships. Um, when you're starting out, you have to pay your dues, and there's just no way around it. You have to pay your dues. There is no shortcut. There is no easy way. Um, you have to work hard, and you have to earn the trust of the people you're working with. And that's where you learn about leadership is, can these people you're working with trust you? Can they count on you? Are you a good crew member? And as you move up, um, just one of the best things I've been able to do is use some of the knowledge I learned from school or knowledge I learned at Kirby or vice versa to help whatever gaps I'm seeing where I'm at, help them with those gaps and show them, hey, look, offshore, this is how the barge industry handles this particular issue. Um, and a lot of things cross over, and I just I think moving forward, where the schools can help and improve is working together, with cloud-based computing and cloud-based servers and things like virtual reality. Um, I see opportunities for organizations like Siemens Church and A&M, for instance, or San Jacinto College, or even Kirby. They have their own simulator to share content, to share lessons on a particular subject, to share maybe it's models for the simulator or databases for the simulator. And if we could take some of the things that we're teaching here at SCI and bring them to the cadets at A&M, well, then they would learn those lessons sooner. And then we could be tackling different issues um, when they come through our shop. So um, I think as the technology continues to evolve, if we can just share information, share materials, it would make a big difference because you're not reinventing the wheel.
Well, just walking through your life, Tell me about your experiences in the Navy Reserve and your roles in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Sure. I started out, the unit didn't really know what to do with me. I joined as a lieutenant, and typically by then you already know how the Navy works. And so people would come to you, they see this thing on your collar and they expect you to know the answer. And of course I didn't, because all I had done was those 2 weeks a year sessions. But they assigned me to as admin officer early on, just to learn how the unit functioned administratively. And again, early on, all I can say is I learned as much as I could from the chiefs around me and the senior enlisted folks, leading petty officers assigned to the departments when we had to work together. But it really, that's where, just because you have rank and um, there's a hierarchy there doesn't mean you're not learning from, someone who may be junior to you, so to speak, but their experience wise, they know way more. And so um, having to start at the bottom and working your way up um, paid dividends, because I had to learn, okay, how does this unit function? What does it need so that we submit our paperwork properly and that our state of readiness is good. And then as we move to communications, learning the communications systems, um, what they needed to function, the redundancy, the getting a secret clearance, getting a top secret clearance, all those things all of a sudden were really important. And just not being afraid to make people understand when I didn't know the answer, getting help. Sometimes they would have to mentor me, um, even though I was the one in charge of that section. And then the best thing that happened to me was when they activated us and turned us into a boat unit. I didn't know a lot about um, Navy intelligence or surveillance at the time. I wasn't what they called qualified to stand a watch yet. Um, but when they turned us into a boat unit, now that's something I knew about, right? Because I went to maritime school. I'd been a third mate, um, worked at Kirby, had my license at that time, and that's when I really shined because I was able to kind of do what I do at SCI, where I was able to teach them nomenclature, teach them seamanship, teach them navigation, teach them about rules of the road, teach them about situation awareness, teach them about how things work in the harbor and boat systems and fuel, engine systems, electronics. I mean, the whole thing. And it was a blessing because now they could see what I really knew and I was able to give back. And that's when I went from um, comms officer to training officer and then eventually operations department head, where you're in charge of the whole unit operationally reporting to the XO. And it was very rewarding um, to overseas anyway, where you're protecting the harbor, um, you're managing high value assets coming and going, you're protecting against terrorism, the anti-terrorism missions, um, and working with other units for intelligence and surveillance. So is the best experience of my life, leading men in those scenarios and women, and coming back um, with all of our equipment and all of our people intact was just a blessing. We were lucky not to have any problems, any casualties. It was lucky. Not, some of the Coast Guard people after we left weren't so lucky, and um, shortly after that, I stayed on with IBU 13 in Portland, Oregon, And then after we rotated through South Korea in 2007, but that's when I came back, and by then I was at SCI and put in for an honorable discharge.
Well, growing up in Houston, what was your exposure to the maritime industry prior to school, Texas A&M?
I didn't know anything about it, and that's the crazy part. Spring is 20 miles north of Houston. You go down to Galveston, driving down there, you go over the bridges, and you can look out the window and see things, but you just didn't connect the dots as to what was happening under that bridge or in the harbor. And um, my brother and I were the first two to do maritime or to even join the Navy. Everyone else was either Army or Air Force, and it's it's just it's amazing that you see these communities. You see it in Paducah and on the river, and these other communities, Corpus, Houston, and um, these high school kids don't understand the economic engine in their own backyard. And um, for that matter, I've got property in Caldwell, Texas. These people that think they have to move to the big cities to get the big paycheck, and it's amazing the career you can have working on the water, and then you don't have to leave that small town, and it's just a absolute amazing business. I try and talk it up as much as I can, and to get people to understand the benefits personally, what it does to your character, and then professionally. You can have a rewarding career. There's nothing like standing your own watch and the pride that goes along with that, um, the responsibility, and to then kind of leading, even at SCI, leading other people who teach and mentor others to keep moving it forward. It's phenomenal, and I love this business.
Yeah, was Kirby your first exposure to the barging industry?
It was.
Well, fill me in on that. The onboarding with them, the first time you stepped on a towboat, kind of just getting to know that side of the business.
Sure. Yeah, Jim Guidry. I interviewed with Jim Guidry in May of 1998. I vaguely remember pilots agree what was either had just happened or was occurring at the time. And like I said earlier, the first job they gave me was putting a computer on every boat, and so wasn't a hard thing to do.
I meant to ask you there as well. I
Yeah,
wrote it down and forgot to go back to it. Uh, that was in 98.
98.
Well, I know a fair number of captains today that if you say the word computer, they're disgusted. So, how big of a challenge was it moving Kirby's canal boats
Mhm.
to computer work instead of faxes or radios and old logs or water comms or whatever it was up until then?
It was it's hard enough. It's hard enough to give someone like me a crew van and a loaded with computers to catch a boat before you have Google Maps. I mean, you're driving around and trying to call, and you turn left at the crooked tree, and it's just I was lucky enough to find these boats where they were, to much less put a computer in there. And the wheelhouse was all smoky and everything was yellow, and getting it to work and then teaching the guys how to use the computer was sometimes a real chore. The smarter captains would teach the deckhands and tankermen how to do traffic. They just wanted nothing to do with it. Um, and over time, they learned. We all learn. You can't escape it, but it was quite the chore, um, to one, install it, and then two, teach the guys how to do just basic things. Um, and It was they were very resistant to it, but I think in the end, you saw the benefits of that because being able to do invoicing in real time, so to speak, rather than the data entry with the clipboards and the Watercom and the faxes. And it's, I think that's what allowed Kirby to grow so quickly, so big, so quickly was that they had real-time data. Um, it was a big gamble, but I think it paid off. And then, what was it? 5 years later, you saw, what was it? Captain Voyager. And, so it's, now I think most guys know the basis of the computer, or at least can get around, setting it up, turning it on, using it. Um, it's really changed the business, I think.
Yeah, connectivity and real-time tracking. Of course, cell phones, you can reach them anywhere,
Yeah,
anytime.
you can't hide anymore.
Right. Well, Phil, I kind of cut you off. Please continue with your experiences with Kirby and your exposures to the barging world.
And so anyway, I worked with Jim closely in the canal division, but I put a computer on absolutely every boat they had, canal, river, and it was amazing because I got to meet every single boat, every single captain, and during that process of being on board, you get to hear their stories, and you know, it took a while to break through that rough exterior sometimes because, oh, you're a college guy, but look, I got a job to do and I'm here to help and I want to help. And, many of them I became friends with and, um, but once you get that done, that task done and you help them with something that maybe they struggled with, that was the first way I kind of earned their trust. And then secondly, when we moved to um, AIS, which I'd used in Alaska, with polar tankers, and Cat and Voyager, we were some of the first vessels to use electronic charts on the West Coast going in and out of Valdez. I think that was the testing ground for some of that technology. When I went back to Kirby, I'd already seen it, I'd already used it, had a little bit of experience with it. So I was able to help with that. And at the time, guys were deathly afraid of it because they thought it's going to take my job. They're tracking our boat and they're going to get our track lines and you're going to have computers driving this stuff. And of course, that's happening. But I don't think it's going to happen in the barge business. It might happen in other segments of the business, but not the barge business. So I was able to continue to help these guys um, navigate, implementation of AIS and implementation of Cat and Voyager or SEACT or ICANN or Rose Point now. And so it's been quite the journey. I'm not super experienced like my instructors are in terms of posting and being a captain for many, many years is because I wasn't. But I think where I like to make up for it is I'm pretty good with rules of the road and I'm pretty good with electronics and I like to help people understand that stuff better so they stay out of trouble.
It was mentioned in your profile on the Seamen's Church website, and I meant to ask you as well, what is your crew endurance management system expert? What is CEMS?
So SIMS is that's the fatigue mitigation program um, that was developed by the Coast Guard back in the day, and it was designed to kind of raise awareness on um, the problem of fatigue in the business. Um, the first the first goal was to train kind of captains on every boat to be what they called a coach. And what the coach's job was first and foremost to educate the crew and people in the company about um, fatigue and proper rest. When I say proper rest, it's um, how much rest are you getting at one point? 7 to 8 hours for an adult, but it's also the quality of the rest. So, um, the effect of alcohol or eating right before you go to bed or coffee or over-the-counter meds and understanding um, the effect that um, those things have on your ability to sleep. You might sleep 8 hours, but you're going to wake up feeling drowsy um, if you don't manage it right. And then also the effect of the boat itself, noise, temperature, vibration, light, and just teaching people how to better manage fatigue so that when you look at the risk assessment that you do, you can minimize um, occurrences where you're impacting your ability to get adequate rest. And so what what the coach does is Sims is designed to educate coaches to um, reduce those um, the impact of fatigue on their boat or in their company. And then the experts were trained by the Coast Guard to train more coaches. And it's a great program. I did it when I was at Kirby in the mid 2000s. I want to say I got my expert training, well, certainly before I came to SCI. Trained a bunch of coaches, and I've actually used crew endurance where you know you do a lot before you just change the watch. But I've used it on the boat when I worked on the boats here and there. Um, the crew endurance watch, the 7755 or the 8844. When I was running the patrol boat units, I implemented a lot of the things from the crew endurance process and system. When I had control over the watch system in the Navy, and we used it, and it was quite effective. So I'm a believer in it. I know it can be tough to convince people of some of the challenges of the 6 on 6 off watch or the benefits of implementing everything as much as you can. But um, I firmly believe in crew endurance. I think it's a good thing, and um, it's kind of a shame it's gone the way it's gone. But I understand it costs money. It costs significant amounts of money, and I do think in some respects that companies have adopted what's in that program without really knowing it. The boats have gotten so much better now than they were when I started. New builds today are nicer than my house. The staterooms, the cabins, they have gyms, they're quieter, they're just phenomenal. And so I think, and it's in the company's best interest to take care of the crew or they leave. So it's a lot of those issues that we faced back in the day, a lot of that stuff's been resolved, but um, it's a great program. And I'm kind of sorry to see that it's kind of died away, I guess. I haven't heard much about crew endurance in the last 5 or 10 years.
Have you watched any of my material that I published with Charlie Kulagi?
No, I haven't seen it.
It's some over 20 hours published with him on the channel. He was a pilot for many, many years, front watch and back. Um, and he had fallen into some bad habits and resigned from his position from the industry. Um, a note he brings up a lot is that 6 on, 6 off, 6 hour watches, you might get, 4 hours of quality sleep
Yeah.
in each segment. Living like that for 30 days, I mean, how sustainable is that, and what recommendations would you provide under that CEMS system?
Well, like I said, the the first step is always education. And I see it with my son, he's working this summer as an intern down in Corpus Christi on harbor tugs. And he likes to drink these energy drinks. And it's just like, look, that's about the worst thing you could be putting in your body. And it's just getting people to understand that sometimes their habits or their myths or their misconceptions about things get in the way of how much better they could perform if they just limit things like, for me, it was caffeine. I used to be able to drink a pot of coffee, but then you realize once you stop doing that, I'm jittery, I get headaches, I don't feel good. And, maybe I'm sleeping because I'm just exhausted, but am I waking up refreshed? And once you learn about yourself and about your body and the, biology, I suppose, um, and things like meals and exercise and over-the-counter meds, prescription meds, um, that helps. And then, like I said, I think the companies, for the most part, are doing their part with the environment, the boat itself. Those come a long way. And in terms of the watch, it, the biggest thing I could say is shift shift the watch in small amounts first. Don't go from 6 on, 6 off to 8, 8 and 4, 4. Do 7, 7, 5, 5. But the biggest thing is having the back watch, being able to be off watch and eat and shower and do all their things and be in bed before the sun comes up. That's the biggest thing because, and I don't care whether you're working in an office, whether you're a fireman, whether you're a policeman, whether you work in a hospital, the shift work. Once you see the sun come up, you might be able to lay down for 2 hours, but you're not going to be able to fall asleep and stay asleep because the melatonin that's produced, it's cut in half once you're exposed to the light, the bright lights. And that's the single most best advice I give. The second thing I would say is today to people is put this away. Put it away. Use an alarm clock. Don't use don't use this. The mistake people make, I think, today is I'm going to just check the time. And then they get the light is just enough from your device that it's just like turning the lights on in your room. And it has the same effect of uh, well, let me just see what else is going on, because the apps and you you can get that last block of sleep provided there's time to do so. And that difference in REM sleep is critical for anybody who's a pilot because you're using your brain, you're trying to restore that cognitive function in that frontal lobe where reason and logic resides, and that's what you're doing when you're standing a watch. So, whereas on deck you could get away with it with a nap, because on deck it's more physical. Again, younger crowd, um, they might be able to function for a trip and not be in that zombie state that we described. But it's those two things I would say could play a huge role in getting better rest. And offshore, what I teach the mooring masters is the problem is with fatigue in our business is I think it's more of a manning issue than anything else. And if we were properly manned, we wouldn't have some of these issues. But therein also lies the problem. When you're already short crewed on towboats, where are you going to get the extra people? I mean, it's a real problem. So um, if it was easy, I would have the answer. I suppose we all would, but it's not an easy nut to crack on the manning side.
Well, about the personnel side of things on the towboats, what solutions would you envision to increase interest in the industry and retention of these newer people?
Well, I think what we're doing now is remarkable. You see these up and down the river. I've heard about these maritime high schools. We have them here in Houston. And I just think that's amazing. I mean, right here in Spring High School, I knew nothing about maritime, and it's right here in my backyard, the Port of Houston area. And so the first step, just like anything, is raising awareness, um, making sure that individuals understand what maritime is. You don't all have to work on the boat. You can have an amazing career and be in dispatch and work your way up into sales or scheduling or trading, um, in shipyards. If you're an engineer, um, you can do whatever you want. There's so many aspects. People who say they want to do video games, I always show them simulator. I mean, I don't like to think of it as a video game, but it is a computer game, and what you do with it is can have a profound effect on people. So I think if you can help people understand what their strengths are, have an honest conversation, because we're not all equal. What are you good at versus what am I good at, and what are your interests versus what are my interests, and where do you see yourself in 5 years, and help give them the knowledge and the awareness and the experience through internships to see as much of different aspects of the business as you can before they graduate or have to make a decision. And then like I said, you can bait the hook and set the hook. Once they get it in their blood and they fall in love with it, just like most of us did. And then you got them. But you want to make it fun. Uh, I don't think at this point in the game there's a way to not have technology be involved, and that's a double-edged sword. So one way to retain people is, when I was working on my license, we didn't always have cell phones. You had to walk a quarter of a mile down the dock to a payphone if it worked to call home. You didn't have social media, you didn't have internet, and it was hard. It's hard on a marriage. It's hard on a family. Um, Nowadays, you have that luxury, and you have satellite TV, for instance. But as good as that is, I think sometimes the problems change. Now, maybe you wish you didn't know what was going on at home, but I do think as much as you can bridge that connection to where if you're off watch, you can still say goodnight to your kids, or your wife, or read them a bedtime story. It could go a long way. Maybe you're on the boat, but you could still be present in their lives. And the cost that you pay isn't as steep as what maybe we had to pay in the early on with, you know, just not being there. That can play a large role. And, moving forward, just I think again, technology is going to continue to play a role. Do we lean on automation? I think you're going to continue to see reduced pressure to reduce manning. You're going to continue to see automation. What does that do? I have no idea. I think we're already manned at critical levels. I don't know how we could manage less, but I know we've had unmanned boats for quite some time. I tested them in 2006 in San Diego. Um, my brother uses them at BP with supply boats, completely unmanned. I mean, it's possible, but I do think that's application specific. I don't think you're going to see that. How do you build a tow? For instance, in some of these areas, these boats run. I mean, I just have all the respect for the operators, the Upper Mississippi. with the tight turns and the shifting. I mean, the river's changing every day, and it's just too many moving parts to have a algorithm understand what to do next. I don't think that would happen. But maybe mariners will look more like us, working at SCI, where you have control rooms and computers, and someone's driving it remotely so you can catch a nap. I don't know what the future holds, but um, I do know it's here, and how we manage that is up to us.
Before we touch on SCI and wrap this thing up today here, tell me, I've been wanting to talk to someone who's worked in Alaska. I know your experience is relatively limited, just about a year, but fill me in on your first experiences getting up there and what that job was for you.
Sure. So the first time I was in Alaska, I was a cadet. I was doing a winter cruise. I think I was a sophomore or junior at A&M, and I joined a Sealand container ship in Tacoma, and we went from there to Anchorage, and then Dutch Harbor, and then Kodiak, and then back to Tacoma. And Anchorage, in December, I remember going up the Cook Inlet, which the currents are really fast there. I wanted to say it was something like 5 knots, and the ice was just unbelievable. You had to break the ice up before you could dock. And I remember being on deck and looking down at the dock 15 feet. And then the next morning when I woke up 8 hours later, I'm looking up at the dock, 15 feet. And the tidal range was um, just something amazing to experience. Um, and it is very beautiful up there. Um, I don't know what's prettier, summer or winter, but I very much enjoyed Anchorage, Dutch Harbor, Kodiak. Um, Even though you're only in port for, 8 to 10 hours, um, it was a good experience. And then on tankers, um, in Valdez, that was interesting because you're there after the Exxon Valdez, and you're able to see, what was this incident all about? And um, the Narrows there is, I guess it's narrow for super tankers, but after you work on the tug and barge side, it's like Narrows, it's a quarter of a mile wide. But it certainly pretty. Um, you know, the challenges are different with the weather. Um, at the time I was doing it, is there's certainly isolation because you might not be able to get to the cell phone, you might not have a good signal, but it's just it. The way I explain it to people is, if you picture the U.S. in your mind how it was 200 years ago, that's Alaska. It's just untouched landscape and nature, and it's just gorgeous. Um, but not very forgiving, but it's gorgeous. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. I think if you could ever go on an Alaskan cruise, do it, because the people up there are unique, and the landscape is amazing, and even the weather. I enjoyed it. It it was a good experience.
Well, thank you for that, sir. And finally, you said earlier you took over the Paducah and Houston facilities in 2011. Fill
Mhm.
me in on the next 14 years of your career to now with Seaman's Church, what sort of progress you've made with programs, with students, and then maybe touch on maybe kind of what the future holds for your program.
Sure. Um, well, when we started when took over in 2011, the the business, I think, was quite good. I can recall times in Paducah. Of course, back then we would do firefighting, and we would train. ACBL would bring, deck crew, engineers, lots of people through the site and do integrated training. The facility itself had just super strong utilization, 40 weeks every single year. And Houston would lag somewhat, a couple weeks behind. And in 2015, we purchased the new simulators, which is more representative of what you see today with the flat screen TVs and all the bridges being the same. No more big bridges and little bridges. Every bridge had the wraparound flat screens and the same hardware. The technology was much better. And that's really when we started doing, I can recall, more more training for, instead of everything being a 15 barge tow or a unit tow, now we could do fleet boats. Now we could do light boat training. Now we could do more of the tour items, and assessments. We started doing feasibility studies more often with the simulator because it was better. Predominantly bridge projects in Paducah. Um, and then in 2017, we we started doing port projects in Houston for Corpus Christi and working with pilot groups, um, like the Aransas Corpus Christi pilots and federal pilots. Um, More recently, the San Juan pilots in Puerto Rico. Um, and so now we're at a point where we're still doing our tug and barge training, but now we have companies that come, Moran, McAllister, Cotug, that do harbor tug training. And some of them we've done integrated training with the harbor tug captains and the ship pilots. And that's really, um, what I would call, it's not cutting edge. It's been happening for years, but it's a best practice when you can have the pilots perform a maneuver along with the tug captains they work with every day. Um, and the communications and the terminology and the language and whether it's a drill or whether it's something new, it's way better than just having them work with the instructors. Um, and now we're even building new boats, so we're able to take our model building software with Kongsberg and work with firms like Robert Allen in Vancouver to design custom tugboats. That one that's coming our way is, it's an electric tugboat. Other things that are happening right now, of course, are like alternate fuels like methanol or ammonia or hydrogen. And what's exciting is that the simulator now is so good and the physics engine inside of it is so robust that you can model every aspect of that boat and understand, how does this boat perform when it's on electric power versus running the generator, or running methanol or running ammonia versus diesel. And it'll give you the right data for that. And you just didn't have that before. So looking forward, we've come a long way. We're fully staffed in Paducah. Finally, we were running short there since 2018. We're fully staffed in Houston. The future looks exciting. There's lots of bridge projects coming, which may be funded by this bill in Congress. I'm hearing about Vicksburg. I'm hearing about I-24 in Paducah. I'm hearing about a new bridge across the Mississippi in Baton Rouge. But there's also new port projects coming online. And I guess what's new is people's willingness to test things in the simulator to get reassurance, understand the risk, or to streamline the permit process by getting real world feedback. before you go to the investors or before you approach the Coast Guard or the Corps of Engineers with a project. And, hopefully knowing that you have it right before you start building it is refreshing because we didn't always do it that way. And, or if we did, there was only so many people in North America you could go for help with that. And to be able to provide that service is it's good for the company who needs it. It's also good for the mariners because, we're going to be the one making that bridge. And now, to be able to provide feedback during the design phase is meaningful. Because now, hopefully, it'll mean less elisions, less spills, less incidents.
Well, sir, is there anything we've not touched on yet today that you intended to cover here on our chat?
Mm, no, I guess not. I hope this was okay. I know other people are much smoother than me, but um,
No, that's no issue, man. It's not about necessarily the presentation more than capturing, as you said, capturing the history before it's no more. Having a lot of fun with it and wishing I had found the industry sooner to catch some of the stories from the 1940s and
oh yeah.
they're real good old stuff. But no, I appreciate your time here today. And yeah, we'll keep in touch on in progress here and I'll keep you all posted when it publishes.
Okay. Or no, are you based out of Nashville or
Right
Paducah?
outside Baton Rouge, actually.
Oh, Baton Rouge. Okay.
I grew up in right outside New Orleans, and I work a few days a week in our Reserve, Louisiana office.
Okay.
Occasionally in our Port Allen office, but also from the next room. I work from home fairly often.
Cool.
Yes, sir.
Well, if you ever get a chance to come back to Paducah or Houston, I hope you do. And
Yeah,
uh,
I do plan to get back out to Houston. I attended an event there, one of our captain's meetings some time ago,
on that
about
on
I
that
guess
Wednesday.
about a year ago in Houston. So I'll intend to do that here one of these days, and we'll keep in touch.
Great. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, sir.
All
Talk
right.
to you
See you.
soon.